Hi everybody, thanks for watching and welcome back to another Bully Paints video. This time, as everyone seems to really like following along the real-time videos, I'm gonna, probably just for the airbrushing stages to be honest, but I'm gonna do a real-time video on the next project I'm doing, which is ready for Salute. And that is going to be Red Cap from Blacksmith Miniatures, from the World of John Baptiste Monge range. These are a cracking little fantasy 54mm range. And I'm really looking forward to painting this guy actually. Not the easiest miniature in the world to clean up, but you know, this isn't a miniature review page, so that's fine. So here we can see what I've done is built the miniature and then left him in two parts. And the reason behind leaving him in two parts is I can sorry, I'm just reading a text message then that just happened to pop on at the same time. I can paint the flesh work on the body without too much disruption to the rest of the miniature, and then on the head, obviously I want to be able to get into the face, and then I want to be able to mask that off or blue tack that off and get in and do the red work on the cap, which will be a real challenge. Now what I'm going to try and do with this is a fairly stark object source lighting from an sort of off picture torch that's glowing. It'll be a bit of an experiment for me, and that might work and it might not, so I might just sack that off and go to a standard paint job. So we are starting with Harden Steenbeck Infinity with a 0.15 needle again as normal. The compressor's at 28 psi and then the airbrush itself is dialed down to about 22 psi. I'm going to do the hand check that we always do. If anybody follows the channel, you'll know this. So we're going to put the air through and then we're going to let the paint come through, and we've got a lovely, nice, smooth, very smooth flow, which is great. It's perfect for what we need. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit all of the miniature's skin in with a base tone of scale 75 African Shadow. It's a really dark, desaturated, purpley, plummy colour. Hopefully I've also changed the camera setup a little bit, so just bring the light down a bit more. Hopefully you'll be able to actually see me paint all the time and it won't sort of disappear off here when I'm painting. So let's just keep this for reference. Okay, fine. So here we go. You see I'm pulsing the airbrush trigger when I'm doing this. I'm just dropping small amounts of colour on. That will help to prevent tip dry. People that use airbrushes with the trigger held down constantly get a lot of tip dry, and we don't want that ever when we're painting with an airbrush. Somebody asked me a question about that earlier. By the way guys, for those of you who are now subscribing and those of you who are new, thank you so much for subscribing to the channel, because it gives me a bit of a purpose to do this when I'm painting. And secondly, thank you for taking the time to comment, because it's bizarre just how much you really love reading the comments. When people take the time to leave you a comment, I always try and reply to them, because obviously it's not a very big channel. I think we're just coming up to 500 people now, but anything you can do to help me expand the channel, any suggestions, any ideas on how I can go about doing that, and anybody that you can recommend or point towards the channel, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so now I'm gonna just get into this guy's eyes. Nose and then face. I don't know why I'm painting the underside, which is clearly going to be hidden by the miniature. Just sometimes with a base coat, so I just like to do that anyway. Okay. Just dry him off. You can see that my paint cup is bubbling there. The reason it's bubbling is the nozzle at the front is probably just a little bit loose. So I will just tighten that off. Just wipe away a bit of the foam that I blew then. You notice that I don't often put paint caps on, that's because I like to change colour quite quickly. And it's a pain in the arse putting paint caps on. So I want to get a couple of, I'd obviously prime the miniature with Vallejo miniature surface primer in the kind of desaturated black that they do. Just building up a bit more colour on that. Okay, so if I just put him there so you're not looking at nothing, I'm going to, well actually I might as well do this on camera for once. I'm going to bring in my dunk tank for that life hack that we have. I'm just going to drop the airbrush in while it's connected to the compressor. I'm going to swill out all the paint from the cup and then I'm going to blow through. So I'm blowing into the cup and I'm withdrawing the trigger as if it would actually be putting paint through. And what that is doing is pulling the warm soapy water through the airbrush, which is cleaning it far quicker and far more effectively with far less dust than pretty much any other method I've ever worked with or discovered. So I would highly recommend that you use a dunk tank and get sort of proficient with doing that. And I am just blowing out the last of the colour now from it and I'm ready to change colours. I'm going to put a bit of water in and just blow through anything else that's left in there. And dry off the airbrush. Now we've got a nice clean airbrush. It's not kicking out anything. Just water, which is lovely. I know I often sort of talk about this, but it's probably the best thing I ever learned by accident when I was teaching myself to airbrush, is the hack of not using one of those tanks that most people buy to airbrush and to clean airbrushes. You know, they all come in the bundle deals and stuff that you get, and everyone just assumes they're the way to do it, and they're not. It's a much more long-winded way of doing that. So I'm now going to drop in some of the red Indian Shadow. In fact, those of you who watched the Ogrin piece, I'm probably going to use very similar formula in terms of paint choices that I did to do the Ogrin, but it'll be more desaturated in the areas that aren't in the light. So I'm just adding in a couple of drops of Vallejo airbrush thinner into the scale 75. Giving it a good stir in the cup, so we've got that nice kind of loose consistency. And as always, we're going to check the paint long before we do it on the model. So I'm going to let the air come through, and you can see that the paint is actually flowing pretty well. So just check on the back of the hand. Lovely, got another really perfect consistency. I've put much less paint in the cup this time to avoid wastage, because obviously it's only a really small model. And now I am going to pick up the central core of the model as if light is coming in from this direction. Okay, although it's still early stages to be really worrying about like light sources. I'm just building up the tones at the minute. This is that colour last time that gunked up. I've thinned it and sieved it, but it'll still have bits in it which will cause me to no doubt have to have a few unblockages and stuff. Okay, so what I want to do is leave the darkest shadow on the back there and just focus on the areas that might be in the light now, like the hands. Top tip actually, when you're painting miniatures like this, don't forget the hands. It's really easy, it really is easy when you are banging away at the torso and stuff to utterly forget the fact it's got hands. I have painted whole miniatures before and then gone back and gone, oh shit, I haven't painted the hands. Okay, so what you can see, hang on, let me just put the airbrush down. What you can see now is, as the colour is drying, there's a much of the starker kind of red colour here, and then as we come round the miniature it dulls back into that matte colour, that sort of deep plummy colour, and I'm going to try and keep that shadow as we work up through the paint job of the miniature, because it'll be a nice touch on the model. The face is central to the light, in fairness, so it's more a case of where the light will be, not on a wall sconce. Let's just bring it in and dunk tank it again. I like to start the miniatures with quite dark flesh colours. Lots of people will just paint base colours in and then glaze down, and that works really well for lots of exceptional artists. But for me, because I like to do the basic flesh areas with an airbrush first, and airbrushes work best with a level of translucency when you are filtering on top of each other. I just prefer to start dark and work up to light. You'll see probably on this video I'll also go back and put the shadows in again if I've over lightened it. I do that all the time. So let's just put the airbrush. This is a Harder and Steenbeck airbrush stand. It's expensive and poncy and unnecessary, and something I bought when I didn't know what I was doing, but it does the job, funnily enough. Next colour I'm going to use is Scale 75 Basic Flesh, Scale 75 Pink Flesh, which is the kind of next natural step from the shadow colour that we just had. And there's a suspicious thing there. Is that a hair? Yes, it was a hair, so that's good. Let's get that out. I can see particles in this one, because they're just a bit thick paints, so you just have to really make sure you're getting in and mixing this well. Again, we've got that nice loose consistency. I've not had to adjust the pressure yet for a paint, so I wonder if I'll get 3 in a row of perfect consistencies. So let's open the airbrush and pull the colour through. No is the answer, based around that. You can see here all the crap that's already clogging it, you see? There's a whole lot of crap in that, which is not what we want. Okay, luckily the crap has actually blown through. This crap that I'm talking about is just paint particles of semi-dried paint from the inside the Scale 75. It's an infuriating thing that happens with these colours, but it's just something you have to deal with as an artist, because there's not much you can do about it. Okay, so I'm going to start with the face this time. Just checking in on the hand. That's fine, and we don't want to lose. There's not much colour left, so I'm just going to not waste too much more. And I am going to, from slightly above, just working okay. I'm going to do the same now for the shoulders, the neck, the musculature under the chest. elbow, hand, forearm on this side, just around the top of the hand, perhaps just a little bit there just for aesthetics. Just going to do a little bit to bring the muscle shading up on that side. Okay. You can see the contrast is quite stark here. That's annoying. Look, he left the mould line on the arm. That's very annoying. I did not see that when I cleaned the model up. Need to address that now. Okay, so I've shaved the mould line off. Now I'm just going to have to paint that back in. I think what I will do with that is cheat. So I'm just drying it up. I'm just going to quickly brush, just repeat the stages that we actually did previously with the airbrush. So I'm just going to quickly brush on the first foundation colour. Just dry that off. We'll get the same red just very thinly. Okay. Right, dry it off. And now I'll be able to blot on the skin colour again without too much drama. So I'm building up the skin tone's opacity now. So just building up the quantity of pigment on the model in the areas that are catching the light, but the darker side is still very dark. Okay. Simple as that. Okay, I'm just going to dunk what you can hear is just me cleaning it off camera. There's no point in me showing you that every single time. And obviously this is another real-time video, so you are following me as I actually paint it. I'm not stopping and editing this. I'm not speeding the process up. It's good. It gives you an opportunity to kind of really see how much an airbrush helps an artist. What I would say, and lots of people say this, and it actually drives me insane. Like, you know, people still say, "Oh, airbrushes is cheating," and you know, you don't. It's not the same and everything else, and that's absolute bollocks. It's actually harder to use an airbrush than it is to use a paintbrush. And I've been painting for 24 years now, and only using airbrushes in the last probably 3 years, maybe 4 years. And when I switched to using airbrushes, I found it really hard, like ridiculously hard, because you're with a paintbrush, you're touching the model all the time, so you've got connection with the model. With an airbrush, you're pointing what's effectively a gun of paint at your model without any connection whatsoever. And if you don't have the skill of the trigger control or the placement of the pigment, and all the other things that go with being a good airbrush artist, you're just going to absolutely royally screw up your model. Just pulling through. Good, we've got a lot of crap in this one too. Okay, you see the pressure is too high there, so I'm going to dial that down because it's spidering on my hand. Still too high, still spidering, so I'm going to turn the compressor down a little bit. Okay, I'm actually going to add a bit more pigment in because that. Which colour did I just do? Pink flesh. This is basic, isn't it? Okay. It's not a colour. Not a consistency I'm happy with. Always check it on your skin because the skin's a great representation of the surface tension of a model. Okay, now I need to turn this pressure back up. Okay, that'll do. We'll lead in with the face again. So we've still got that really strong contrast there. Lovely. Okay, time to change that colour out. I'd be really fascinated to know, actually, if you take the time to leave me a comment where you're watching from, because there's been a lot of new subscribers recently, which I'm hugely grateful for. Because let's face it, I'm just a painter sat in a log cabin in the garden. It's nice to sort of share this with people. But yeah, if you tell me where you're from, I'd be fascinated by that. See how sort of diverse it is. Okay, so we've got light skin now, scale 75 light skin. There's another scale 75 skin colour called golden skin. I don't use that very often, I've got to be honest. It's not really my kind of tone for skin. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's very good to use on things like elves. Obviously I don't paint a lot of pointy ears, so I don't use it very often. Of all the scale 75 sets, the skin set is probably, or the flesh set is probably the best, in my humble opinion. That's too thin, which is amazing considering how much pigment I put in there. I'm going to drop a bit more in there. That's pale skin. Where did I put light skin? Light skin. Right. Let's try that. That's very, very thin. So I'm actually, instead of dialing it down and going for all that faff, I'm just going to add a bit more pigment into it still. I must have squeezed the thinner a bit tighter than or a bit harder than I thought I had. There's 3 lots of pigment gone in there now. That should be better. Okay, I was just dialing it down on my hand with this quick adjust here, just until I got it to a point that I was happy with for the spread. Okay, this is one of the proper lights now, so I'm only going to focus this very lightly, and I'm going to get quite in close with the airbrush. Okay, just for ease of loading purposes, I'm going to stop the first part of this here now. And we can see that the face is pretty standard, but the miniature itself, the contrast from light to dark is very heavy. And that's the theme I'm going to carry across all of the colours I put on it, because I'm going to add a filter torch colour to it later. Thank you for watching, and tune in for the next part.